So death teaches us to live. It will not have the last word. And the first part is being separated by death. In Marriage Encounter, we deal with the theme of death in presentation 6 of the original weekend. It is said that death is a reality in our lives. Therefore, it is good to have a dialogue on this topic. In doing so, we do not focus on life after death, but on the reality that one day we will physically be separated from each other. We have all been invited to tell our stories about our journey towards death. First, we say that we generally avoid talking about death because we consider it depressing, morbid, unreal, and unnatural to do so. And we conclude by explaining how, through dialogue, we have begun to accept each other. Although different, we face the reality that one day we will be separated by death. And we answer the question, what are my feelings when I think that one day we will be separated by death? This is a powerful presentation that touches the hearts of those present. Some are shaken, some upset, some angry, but many are grateful. It's a subject we don't want to talk about, but it's good to share each other's pain and maybe even cry together.
So now we look at the little daily deaths in relationships. Our life as a couple is full of pitfalls. Every time we fail to communicate, every time we do not cherish the relationship, we experience a little daily death. At the end of the 6th presentation of the original weekend, we express our anguish and sadness at the inevitable fact that one day we will no longer be together. But we also say that sharing about death is about the present, not the future. Our journey calls us to live and love each other more today, not tomorrow, when death will separate us. It invites us to accept each other's feelings about death, so that we can live more intensely today, so that we do not end up with regrets for wasted opportunities, and so that we can live better with our spouse. The sadness we feel also comes from the little daily deaths that we inevitably experience, such as our attitudes or shortcomings, which can have a devastating effect on our relationship. It can be like walking through a minefield. These little daily deaths come from neglect, inattention, and even contempt that weakens the relationship and causes distance. We talk about these shortcomings that undermine our relationship and that have the effect of little daily deaths. That is why we can also call them relationship landmines. They can explode in a brutal and violent way, or act in a creeping, barely perceptible way. But if they aren't diffused, dealt with, the result is always the same: the relationship's destruction.
So, here are some examples of landmines. Number 1, irresponsibility. The root of so many ills that kill our relationship lies in the inability to be responsible to oneself and to the other. This happens when I do not share with you what I'm experiencing, my difficulties, my fears, my disappointments. Or I postpone a decision or abandon a discussion between us, hoping things will take care of themselves. Or, instead of rolling up my sleeves, I have expectations of you doing the work. Or, Instead of acknowledging my responsibility, I blame you. Or I abdicate responsibility and leave you with the care of the children, for example. So that's the first one, irresponsibility. Second one is indifference and anger. Adopting an attitude of indifference or anger are two different ways of being irresponsible, but they have the same effect, that of breaking the relationship, of pushing the other person away. The logic that generates indifference is, I don't want you to touch me anymore because I don't want to suffer anymore. The logic that generates anger, on the other hand, is, if I listen to you, I'm afraid I'll have to question myself. I'm afraid I'll have to change. It's better for me to defend myself with anger. The third landmine that they've identified is superiority. The feeling of superiority very often expresses itself in condescending criticism. This form of criticism can be used as a weapon and makes relationships impossible. We often hear of positive criticism or even constructive criticism. Expressed with love and understanding, it allows people to question themselves and choose to improve. But often, criticism is a manifestation of superiority, whereby, instead of welcoming the other person, I judge him or her. In order to correct our own mistakes, we would like to feel understood and loved. In reality, in the face of certain forms of criticism, we judge ourselves condemned and isolated. Instead of building our relationship, it drives us apart and creates imbalance.
And then we also talk about painkillers. We live in an anaesthetized society which uses painkillers and palliative care to avoid facing pain and death. Disengagement is a first strategy to avoid suffering in the relationship. Indeed, among the failures that divert us from our commitment to the building up of our relationship is the rejection that comes from mistrust. This is the reaction of those who are so disappointed that they abandon all hope and all plans. So we don't commit, we just exist. Then another way of not investing in the relationship is to compensate with things outside the relationship. The difficulties in our relationships and the pain that derives from them lead us to look for ways to ease our suffering, ways that we call painkillers, compensation. The first way of easing our suffering is to look elsewhere for what we are unable to balance between the two of us. I will feed the needs that I neglect in our relationship. For example, I may invest myself elsewhere to value myself when I don't see value in our relationship. I can give the children all the love that I dare not express or ask from my partner. I may indulge in distractions such as drugs, tobacco, alcohol, chocolate, television, fantasies, sexual and other, luxury and travel, social networks, smartphones, video games, lotteries, and the list goes on and on. This allows me to momentarily fill the vacuum created by the fact that I don't take responsibility for my needs to be loved and to be valued in my own eyes. I mean, a means of not feeling the suffering too.
Too much.
Too much, yes. We can call this compensation. Finally, there are attitudes that we adopt to avoid feeling suffering, such as silence, rejection, criticism, cynicism. Talking about death in the relationship in our lives, we can also think about the fact that sometimes it is necessary to die to oneself to allow the other to grow. This means knowing how to control certain aspects of one's personality, surrendering certain dreams or desires or expectations, avoiding selfish and narcissistic attitudes to allow the other person to take his or her place by our side. Let us remember that the road to holiness is travelled together. And it can also mean accepting the other is not as I would like him or her to be. This means to let the image I have created of the other person die. Avoiding idolizing them, to love them as they are, with their merits and their faults. So we wrote to the question, in our relationship as a couple, in a relationship with a close person, when did I experience a little death? How did I experience it? What are my feelings when I think about it today? So we will put the question up on the overhead a bit later. So in answer to the question I wrote, Dearest Bianca and Andy, thank you for being here today, Andy and Bianca, and appreciate it. If you're feeling a bit under the weather and with your busy schedule. So there have been many instances when our relationship has experienced little deaths and even a few large deaths. I can identify with the 4 landmines that occur in relationship. 1, irresponsibility, indifference, anger, and superiority. And these can overlap for me. When I do not take my ME task seriously, this will be a lack of responsibility, and this will cause a little death in our couple relationship and in our team relationship. I will also try your patience, Bianca, at these times when you show empathy towards me because of my behaviours. I do feel sad that I've let myself down and have also let you down at the same time. Although indifference is not as prominent in our couple relationship today as it was in the past, my lack of response to you during a conversation or lack of engagement with you on a topic will show my indifference. A few nights ago, when you were sharing your thoughts and feelings, and my failure to reply or to ask you questions showed my indifference. My behaviour to defend myself when questioned or when I feel threatened usually results in anger towards you. Recognizing the physical change in my body when I feel anger helps me to manage my reactions better these days. But I need to monitor these physical changes better. These angry outbursts or sarcastic comments will cause a little death in our relationship. Lots of love, Paul.
And I wrote, Dearest Paul and Andy, this presentation is very relevant to our relationship. Well, our relationship. I fear the number of little deaths we experience that aren't properly looked at have the potential to destroy our relationship. It is not the little death that is the problem. It is the lack of communication of our feelings or the lack of acceptance of someone else's feelings. I experience a little death whenever I am in bed alone. I feel alone. I feel sad that you choose not to be there. I feel neglected as I'm experiencing a challenging physical time and appreciate the warmth and comfort of connection. I feel rejected as I perceive you are choosing other distractions to compensate for not sharing your needs and wants with me. I experience a little death whenever I shut you out or remove myself from the relationship. I feel sad for the lack of connection and warmth. I feel annoyed with myself that I have allowed my behavior to create the distance. All my love, Bianca.
And I wrote, Dear Paul and Bianca, thank you for extracting this formation from all that you received at the European Council. I'm only sorry I wasn't with you to experience it at first hand. When I think of little deaths that I've experienced in my relationships with my community, I think one that has affected me a lot is the death of my idealism. I had thought that life in community was guaranteed to make me happy and to fulfill all my expectations about being like Jesus, being holy, being a man of prayer. I remember a number of occasions when I was encouraged to be less idealistic, to accept compromises, to settle for a lower standard. The challenge of the gospel to be perfect as God is perfect is just too much to achieve. I began to judge people's motivation, and this caused me to think less of them and put a wedge between me and them, a little death in the community. But I realised that I wasn't living up to these ideals myself. I was, in fact, settling for mediocrity. That was another death, another nail in my coffin. But still the encouragement came. We have high ideals at our various meetings. We keep on facing the challenges of our modern age, secularization, the seeming irrelevance of the church and the preaching of the gospel, and the indifference of so many people to what we're trying to do. Our most recent general chapter has put out a message encouraging us to be missionaries of hope. Nevertheless, the reality of our situation keeps interfering. We're getting older, fewer, less able to do new and exciting things. The approach of death is a reality. Another little death. And yet there's the realization that this is God's work. It doesn't depend on me. I just have to do what I can as well as I can and trust that Jesus will be able to use this. So yes, I have moments of sadness when I think about these little deaths. I'm disappointed that so much of what I've tried to do in Africa and here in the UK has largely come to nothing. But I keep reminding myself that this is the way it was for Jesus. He died, but was raised to glory through the power of the Holy Spirit. And I believe God will do and is doing the same for me. Lots of love. Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
And we now have a question for you. So, in our relationship as a couple, or in a relationship with a close person, when did I experience a little death? How did I experience it? What are my feelings when I think about it today? And so, I think we'll do 10 minutes writing, then maybe just 5 minutes sharing as a couple, and then sharing into the bigger group.
For 30 minutes.
For 30 minutes.